Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we're talking about finance transformation and the importance of using data and technology in a good modern finance transformation program and practices. I've got with me Grant Deans. Grant is a finance transformation specialist, luckily enough, for that topic. He's got a background in various leadership positions in finance and finance departments focused on improving operations and efficiency. He's worked across the globe in the US, in Australia, in Southeast Asia. He is CPA qualified and is currently working towards his master's in finance, which all sounds very exciting. Grant, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming along.
Well, great. Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
No worries at all. So yeah, this idea of finance transformation. So why the hell does, I mean, we talk about transformation in everything, don't we? Digital transformation, finance transformation, data transformation. Why finance? Why does it need? Why did it need, or why does it still need transforming?
Yeah. I think finance is really always transforming because it's really a case like in the past, trying to keep up with the business and keep up with where the direction of the business is going and the different needs and requirements that people have. So it's really sort of evolved through time where we looked at your traditional finance processes and started to improve them. And now sort of where we've gotten to today, where sort of the technology's moved that far forward that we need to be able as an organization to keep transforming, stay with the business, but then also transform ourselves internally to be able to use the sort of tools and techniques and technology that's out there.
Right. So it's a part help the organization itself transform through the lens of finance, but also the finance department itself and the ways it works and the processes that it has. And the way you sort of position that, it sounds like driven by the technology that now exists, it's now worth transforming, or is it more that just the old ways of working, the traditional ways of working, methods, no longer keep the pace with what's happening in the wider world and inside an organization itself?
Yeah, so I think it's twofold. I mean, the first part, like you said, it's really the need to stay relevant inside the organization. And that's what's caused us to really sort of change a lot of how we add the value and what we bring to the table. But when we think about the technologies that are now available to us, we've had to transform our own competencies and our own, what we, internally, what we're learning as part of finance as say, an industry or as a profession. So really moving from, back in the day when I first started, accounting was the competency that we had. And now, depending on the industry that you work in, if you work in finance, there's maths requirements, statistical requirements, there's quantitative analysis, there's technical implications that we need to really understand and be proficient at and bring that to the table as well. Because a lot of the tools that we're working with have moved so far.
I know that obviously finance departments and accounting practices are sort of regulated, and there's some standards, global standards, local standards that exist for management accounts and month-end reporting and reporting back to regulators if you're in regulated businesses. Has that stuff changed that's driving transformation, or is that stuff actually pretty stable, and it's more strategically driving an organization that's where the transformation comes from?
Yeah, so when I look at, if we think about the finance function holistically, we've got your traditional corporate finance, which is a lot of the corporate transactions that we have. It could be tax, it could be mergers and acquisitions, consolidations, that sort of thing. That part heavily regulated and hasn't changed. It's still very transactional. You may change your strategy on your tax, position, but fundamentally the transaction itself is the same. If we think about US GAAP and how that translates, and any changes that we've had from a financial accounting perspective, that part stayed relatively stable as well. We do make changes in say, different software recognition and changes in the telecommunications industry around how we're recognizing a lot of the transactions that we've got. But fundamentally, you're correct, that has stayed the same. So the big part that I see that's changed and is cutting edge at the moment, and where the exciting part of finance is really in that FP&A, so financial planning and analysis space.
Yeah.
because that's where we get to use, the great new tools that are available. We're implementing a lot of the advanced, say, AI techniques, as well as the algorithms that we've got, and really driving the information to see what sort of insights it gives us, and then how we can use that to be, say, timely and relevant, and support the business in what they're looking for. So
Got it.
that's the part that's, it's still quite fluid and changing at the moment.
What's the, just to help there, because I've been in and around FP&A teams, and even just straight up insight teams within finance departments, even if they're not known as FP&A. But what's your view on the role of FP&A in a business, in an organization? And I'll tell you the reason I ask that is that lots of businesses either struggle or are trying to work out where to put analytics functions within an organization. And not all analytics is finance focused, but often it can end up in finance because FP&A has grown up and analysts are in that team, and they have often have a good finger on the pulse with what drives financially the organization, which ultimately ends up pushing an organization. So what's the remit, if you like, or what should the remit be of an FP&A function?
Yeah, exactly. That's a very topical point at the moment, because there's one school of thought that suggests that in the future, FP&A may break away from traditional finance and move more into that analytics function of an organization. From my perspective, several years ago, I started looking at candidates who had maths degrees and statistics degrees, because I wanted to pull that inside of finance. If we think about, from my perspective, where FP&A is going to in the future and what it might look like in say 2 to 3 years, is a very good grasp of the data and the information sources that we've got, a very good grasp of the technologies we're using, especially if it's, say, machine learning or the algorithms that we're putting in place to understand the information that we've got. But at the end of the day, your FP&A organization, sitting alongside the business leader, or say the business unit leader, the head of sales, and finding ways to not only present a P&L report or a forecast, but giving insights into profitability of a product, or more detailed profitability of a product, finding those connections between, say, big source data that we may have that's publicly available data, say on the internet, things like that, and then matching it to the effectiveness of marketing campaigns, linking it back to the product, but then also trying to give a little bit of a predictive analytics around it as well, so that we know a combination of a tariff on imports or exports plus a movement in FX is going to produce this sort of an outcome based off the back learning or the back validation that we've had of the performance of the business.
Got it. And is it that's I think I can see where that fits in. So there's a financial lens to it, and I've seen certainly profitability, product and customer profitability, often quite hard to put a finger on. There's lots of rules and methodologies for how you allocate costs between different products or between different customers depending on their activities and those sorts of things. But I can also see that you mentioned the marketing effectiveness, for example. How do you prove that the campaign drove incremental benefit versus just getting the people back into the shop or buying the thing that they were going to buy anyway? And it's interesting though, because there's a debate where that sits. I've seen that sit in marketing. I've seen the marketing function absolutely want to prove that they are delivering best bang for buck when it comes to marketing campaigns. So I guess as part of transformation, there's some debate on, and you mentioned where you sort of started that piece, was where does FP&A sit in the test of time, and how do you divide the responsibilities between the various analytics functions that are looking at this stuff?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's a very good point, because at the moment, one of the biggest challenges that we're facing is, I'm a user of this information. You're a user in marketing of this information. Somebody else in sales analytics is a user of the information. And, are we getting enough, say, or integrity and accuracy of the information by using common sets of information, or are we producing competing results?
Yeah. Yes. Well, there's two angles there, isn't there? There's are we starting from the same data set and analyzing the situation in the same and more hopefully the right way? But also there's a question of, it's good to use data sets in multiple ways. So, finance can use customer data and marketing can use customer data. That's totally fine. The clarity, I suppose, comes from where should an analysis for a certain thing sit, because on that example of marketing effectiveness, if marketing are testing that, then potentially testing, marking their own homework about how good a campaign was, but equally, where does working out profitability of customers sit? Should that sit with customers or should that sit with finance? And that sort of conversation, I guess, must happen in transformation discussions, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, it's an ongoing discussion as to who may own the activity, but one of the when we're looking at how effective a transformation is, and is it going to be around in 6 or 9 months, and will it still be relevant after I've gone through this process? It really comes back to some of those fundamentals of where am I getting the information from? Is it accurate? Are they using the same information but a different purpose, or have we, created a rod for the back of the organization by everybody doing their own thing, which longer term is not sustainable.
Yeah, for sure. So what's your background then, Grant, in all of this? So you're obviously transformation specialist, lots of different roles, lots of different companies around the world. What, how have you got into transformation? What's the bits that you love and hate about it?
Yeah, so I started many years ago in financial services. So I worked for American Express in their internal control department with a focus on foreign exchange transactions. Right. And was lucky enough to see parts of Asia doing that and travel around. I then moved to one of the banks in Australia, and when I started, it was more of a consumer retail banking audit role that I had. But that then evolved. It was back at the time when we had new technologies coming, as in single sign-on way back in the day. We also had a lot of we started to automate some of the call center functions, and there was a real crossover between the processes we had from a retail banking perspective as well as the technologies we were introducing. And that, I guess, then led me to more of an IT audit speciality. And by the time I finished with the bank, I was one of the lead auditors from a project auditing perspective. So looking at the big infrastructure projects in the bank, from a technology perspective, how were they transforming their core data processing techniques and consolidating systems, and really looking at the effectiveness of those projects and how it sat. From there, I was lucky enough to move into Qantas, the airline. Again, at a point where there was a lot of change happening. So I spent a lot of time with the finance operations teams, improving the basics around payables, receivables, a lot of our general ledger activity, but then also some major sort of banking software implementations, which transformed the global banking, say, platform that the airline was using. Right. And that then led me to the great role that I had with Schneider Electric, which was, again, looking at, say, finance operations, consolidating them in different countries, introducing new technologies. So making the operations sort of work and keeping the lights on, but then also keeping them abreast with the industry standards and driving that continuous improvement or transformation process. So I think you could probably say I've ridden the wave of finance change over the last 15 to 20 years, and everything from your basic automating technologies of OCR capabilities in accounts payable through to some of the more insightful tools that we've got at the moment, where we're determining what the algorithms are and how we want to use the data and the information that we've got, but then also trying to not only sort of do predictive analytics, but then also predict what the business is going to ask for. So as a finance organization, we're staying one step ahead of them in being able to meet the requirements.
I was going to ask you about that, actually, the role of finance in terms of supporting the activity, the operations, the setting, and driving of strategy versus so a kind of like a support role in an organization versus a strategic direction setting and value adding, I suppose, function. What is that? Is it black and white, and it's like you're either support or you're leading strategy, or is it always a bit of both?
It's really a bit of both, but we are moving more towards that sort of strategic support And that's why we need, and to be able to provide that though, we need the tools and the information to do that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm assisting with strategic decisions, whether that's an acquisition or it's customer based, whichever, really having that real time data available so that I can, crunch it very quickly and assist and participate in that strategic decision. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all about in that space being relevant. If you're not relevant, you won't win a seat at the table. And if we don't have the information at our fingertips, then it's no use.
It makes it hard to be. Yeah, it makes it hard to be relevant. Yeah, you can add value if you've got good information to help drive a conversation, deliver some insights. That's something that people didn't know. Which brings you to sort of having good data, good technology that enables you to help with those discussions.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. If it's, I mean, gone are the days of finance turning up, sort of arriving at your desk in the middle of the month saying, here's your performance from a month ago. It's real time. You need to manage a dynamic business on a day-to-day basis or a week by week and understand exactly where it's moving.
Yeah, I mean the other side of that's the angle of how can finance be relevant, play a part, have a seat at the table in many sort of decision making discussions. Where the data industry is going a little bit more is much more putting that power in. You talked about the business before, putting that power in the hands of the decision makers within the organization, the operational decision makers, the strategic decision makers, which of course may or may not be finance. But self-service is the phrase that's used. But enabling people to access data in a way that means they can make their own sort of decisions based on good insight. There's a balance there, isn't there, between expert financial knowledge being put on the table and data and technology and insights being put on the table together. So is there a view you've got on whether this is much more about embedding people in that discussion versus applying data and technology and giving free hands-free help, if you like, to different parts of the organization?
I mean, that's an interesting point. It's from a finance participation perspective. Yes, I've got the information. I can help you get the information and help you interpret the information to make those decisions. But when we think about it, like I remember a couple of some examples of projects that I worked on where we were doing a self-service delivery model for the financial reporting or using the financial information, and the take-up of the adoption really wasn't there. And when we sat with the people to really understand it, it wasn't quite how they wanted to use the information. If we were pivoting on a customer and they wanted to see it pivot on a product, or they wanted to drill down in this respect from a team performance versus holistic performance. So it's, for me, that's really a case of demonstrating that partnership with the organization, so that if we really want to move into a self-service environment and get these people using the information themselves and understanding it, have we gone about the transformation in a way that's going to meet those needs as well?
Yeah. That makes sense. You mentioned earlier, so we're talking about transformation, and then in your discussion of your sort of previous background, you talked about continuous improvement. I'm just exploring that for a sec. Do you see transformation as genuinely sort of, it has been seen, let me frame it differently. It has been seen in the past as sort of like a major, transformation sounds big, it sounds bulky, it sounds, long term, it sounds, difficult, it sounds like turning a tanker, and often it can be. Continuous improvement just sounds like ongoing, regular, iterative, agile fixes and improvements, which obviously can lead to some major transformation. So what have you seen work in terms of sort of setting a big program of change and going after it versus lots of small continuous improvement changes that lead to a transformation? If I can paint those big sort of like wide range of difference there.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said agile, because a lot of the time, I mean, there's studies out there that show 70% of finance transformations, I should say, fail or are not relevant by the time they've implemented. And the biggest challenge you have around a juggernaut of a transformation, and sometimes it is required. I mean, there are times where you do need to make a big fundamental and sweeping change, but 9 times out of 10, you get to the end of a juggernaut transformation like that, and by the time you're ready to switch it on and go live, the business has moved,
Yeah.
and you find yourself in those situations where the business is agile and moving. Then you're constantly coming back and redefining your business requirements, and it just
Yes.
makes the process go on and on and on.
Mm. Mm.
Where we've had, where we've had a lot of success, and it's also a fine line, but where we've had a lot of success is that sort of demonstrating the strategic vision and the journey, the holistic journey the organization's going on. This is where we're a part of it. And then having those incremental wins, and
Yeah.
to be quite specific on that, starting with we'll start with a new piece of AI and a new piece of technology, and having small wins and getting people involved in the process early, so that as we're moving through the project, we're able to pivot or move if the business is moving. But then also it gives you an opportunity to get people involved in the project to understand where it's moving to in the future, so that your outcome from your transformation is sustainable and then scalable, rather than and fluid per se,
Yeah.
rather than a static piece of delivery that has a timestamp on it as soon as you go live.
Yeah. Is that sound, well, I've seen that being quite challenging, partly because lots of the transformation that I've seen in finance that's needed is fairly major fundamental re-implementation or new implementation of some kind of meaty technology. SAP implementations is sort of one example where, in the ERP platform and the finance modules and all the rest of it that need to go alongside that. And there's some quite big, that's some fine stitching and brain surgery sometimes. So that in its own right make it take longer, be more difficult, or actually is then the technology that you've seen in the finance space that now makes that much more effective and easier to do, even if not easy?
Yeah, and that really, when I guess you start to look at the technology bricks of the organization and how it's pieced together, because 100%, an SAP implementation is going to take a lot longer, and making sure that it's you're able to correct the process that might have been a challenge in the past, have a process that's going to work, but then also be future thinking or forward looking,
Yeah.
to make sure that that's working. But a lot of the organizations have gone through those changes, I would say, in the last 10 years or so. So there's a lot of focus on, if you look at the technology stack that you've got, if you have the fundamental or the core solution being SAP correct, then it allows you to be more dynamic and agile with, with your other solutions.
Yeah, so sort of foundational technology platform that you can then build on allows you to be more agile and adaptable at the point you need to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
The other side I've seen on finance transformation is changes to sort of process. So even if I think of something like statutory reporting or sort of global budgeting and forecasting, or even budgeting and forecasting across one country across multiple departments, and like the grain that you do that and who does it. So I'm kind of thinking that the processes and the people and the culture around financial reporting, even sort of some base financial reporting, must come into this. We've talked sort of data and technology, but in terms of the kind of the people side and the process side of doing transformation, is that something that helps, hinders, improves the chances of success on transformation programs?
It's well, it's both in a way, and it's both because you do have, say, nuances in different countries on how that works. And if you have, you have a process that requires human intervention or interpretation before you have an output, that's going to get exposed as you try to, say, automate it or transform the process into an industrial type solution. It is, however, though, when you're looking at the transformation itself, some of those people I find do get overlooked and deserve a seat at the table when you're going through the transformation, because they're the insights and the brains that will tell you the challenges that they're having in obtaining the information, or this financial information is available weekly, this HR information is available monthly, this is what I need to do to work with it, and these are the outputs I have from a detailed perspective. So a lot of that can give you the sort of the road, the flags that you need to see what success might look like. by removing some of these challenges and really getting to know the information that you've got. But then culturally, I guess within the organization itself, and then looking across the organization, there are other, I guess, dark spots in the organizations where there's a wealth of knowledge that don't necessarily get a seat at the table. And I think of some of the data people that I've worked with in the past who were able to give me insights on the easiness to change it, correct it, make it work with how we need it to work in the future, versus, whether or not the data is inoperable and static, and we need to look at the technical solution to drive an algorithm to fix the information.
Yeah.
So it's from a people perspective, it's, yes, people are going to have different ways to do it, but if you bring those people together, you'll find a way to to get the solution to the point where you can use it and it is insightful. But then also culturally across the organization, how do we position these changes, these transformations, so that it gets the excitement of people. They know that it's not going to be one of these transformations that's dead in the water when it goes live. It's an integral part of the future, and we are going to be sustainable.
Is there a problem with the word transformation, do you think?
Yeah, it can lead to, it can lead to fatigue. There's so many different changes happening and things happening so quickly. It's really important that, yes, if you use the word transformation, you don't want to seem like you're taking on the world, and it's going to cause fatigue in all the team members. But yeah, positioning it in a way that people see that it's doable, workable, and it's not going to exhaust them at the end of the day.
Yeah, because there's a balance, right? I think that yes, some things need transforming, but that doesn't mean it's big. It's big sweeping change overnight. Over a long period of time. This idea that you brought around sort of smaller incremental changes that lead to transformation, I think is a nicer way to sort of see and think about transformation. But I certainly with digital transformation, it was belt and braces. Rip out the heart of technology and put a new face on it, and all the back end as well. So it was kind of fairly major transformation, and lots of in many sectors, lots of the process around it, the physical manifestation that digital needs to sort of live with normally also needs to change. There's so much around it that needs to change that it is genuine, long-term, big, meaty transformation, and it can't always be small and incremental. So it's a balance, isn't it, between how do you make small and incremental turn into transformation, or do we just, in some instances, we do have to bite the bullet, make major change, heart surgery, and then allow yourself to be iterative and incremental after that.
Well, exactly. And I think the key word there is really iterative. We see a lot of the software developers, they have that iterative sprints, and that's how they're approaching it. And so from a finance perspective, yes, if we don't overwhelm ourselves by taking on the world, we can make these sort of incremental improvements and gradual changes as part of our daily lives. But I think to be successful in that sort of environment comes down to knowing the journey holistically from an organizational perspective. Because if I'm, I can make all the incremental changes and improvements that I like, but if I'm not, say, in the ballpark with where the organization's going and the other leaders in the organization are going, then we're going to end up in different ballparks, different states.
Yeah, brilliant. Cool. So in terms of the approach, we've sort of skirted around transformation, what it is, what it isn't, what we mean by it. We've touched a bit on sort of the data technology that plays a part in that. Is there like some big methods, big approach or approaches to making transformation more successful? We've talked sort of some mindset around transformation, but there's some practical ways that we can approach it that mean it not assures success, but at least helps point us in the right direction for success.
Yeah, exactly. And I think at the moment, like if we think of the transformations of 15 years ago, it was on training, it was on understanding the process, it was on the people, it was on connectivity or a collaboration tool. When we're looking at the sorts of transformations we've got at the moment, there are different elements, say, inside the projects themselves, right, which are coming out to be more important than perhaps they were in the past.
Yeah.
And I find a lot at the moment with the people that I'm talking to, whether that's colleagues or whether that's people in the industry or different organizations, the realization of the importance now of data in a lot of the technology and implementations that we have and transformations in a finance perspective, and making sure that we're approaching what I would call our data strategy for the transformation in a way that's not going to trip us up in 6 or 9 months' time. So really looking at that and thinking about it sort of in its most simplistic form, as a a project manager myself, I really sort of came to the discussion that, or the outcome that we needed a acronym like PEAL as the key, as a way for me to be able to so coach, mentor, develop, help other transformation leaders get to where they need to go. So from a understanding that data is important, and then how do I approach data as part of my project, and that is really some of the basics that we go with, where preparation is key. So it's the P and PEAL. Evaluate the data, align with the organization, and then learn from the data that we have and what we're doing with the data and how successful it is. So when I think about the preparation from a project and a holistic transformation perspective, it's making sure that I understand where my information's coming from, and I've created a baseline as a data set that I need, and I can put that on the table and say, this is all the information sources that I need access to, and this is how frequently we need to get them and where they're coming from, and that sort of thing, so that it's the last thing that you want in that space is to get 4 months down the path building a solution, and the expert in the process who wasn't part of the project comes to you and says, well, I need extra data to make this work. That sort of as an outcome. And then thinking about like the evaluation side of it, it comes down to something that I think we touched on earlier around human intervention. So if you've got data that's, let's say, not clean, or it needs somebody to massage the data, add information to the data, correct the GL postings, clean the data, then that's another challenge that's going to present itself in the project, but something that you need to consider now. And that's where looking and I guess working a lot closer with the data side of the organization, I found that that's where I get all my answers as far as how can I clean it, how can I change it, or is this something that I have to live with and find a different solution for?
Okay. So sort of evaluating the data for its sort of quality and ability to do whatever its downstream process it needs to support.
Exactly. Yes. And then if I am making a lot of changes to the data, then it's taking the time to have that conversation, as in, is it realistic of me to get a change in the data structures and the data sets, or do I need an algorithm to correct that for me and cleanse the data?
Right.
Yeah. And that really leads into the alignment section of this. It's, where am I at on the project? Is the technology that I'm implementing in line with the broader strategy, direction, the journey the organization's going on? But are we also aligning the types of data that I use, that HR uses, that marketing's using, but then also aligning with them on the challenges and the future uses of that data, so that if we've created an outcome or an environment where we have one data source instead of 3 data sources, can they use it? Can I use it? Are we all, we have the same playing field? But then is there potential that we're going to fix 2 of the marketing challenges and 2 of the HR challenges at the same time as we fixed 3 of the finance challenges?
So it's the coming together of, I see why that's called align, because you're thinking across the organization, where's the commonality, where can we work together to solve a business problem, through one set of data, one set of metrics potentially, but just bring together the thinking so that you're collaborating on solving problems.
Exactly. And that leads you to future thinking with these teams as well, as in, this is how we can use the one data lake for 15 outcomes, and we know the integrity of the information that's there.
Great.
Yeah. And then, literally, transformations, the last part there is learning from the transformation. It should be fun. It should be a positive situation, but staying agile enough that, you're failing quickly, or you're having success. But I mean, there's always a celebration when a project or a transformation goes live or a new system goes live. Everybody wants to celebrate
A sigh
that
of
it's
relief,
there.
you mean?
Yes, so from my team perspective, it was always a case of let's celebrate every month and do a release, because we have these iterative developments and we're able to give a positive impact to it, and it really helps to keep the energy in the project and get people engaged rather than sitting around for 3 years waiting for an output.
Mm. So do you, just on that point, I love that. Do you engineer then deliverables essentially to make sure that you're constantly adding value through a transformation rather than, as you say, rather than waiting a year to deliver a piece of functionality, you wait a month to deliver a smaller piece of functionality and build on it? Is that a tactic you've employed?
Yes, absolutely. It's for me, that's a very good way of building the partnerships and the relationships you've got with the stakeholders and end users of the information. But it also it helps to prevent fatigue and people just being tired on projects for a year at a time. It really does help to give a bit of energy to it and a bit of spring in the person's step, and you can actually see what and demonstrate the value of the project in an ongoing basis.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, you've given me a new thing to think about there, the data strategy for finance transformation. I think for me, it's, data strategy underpins of all parts of the organization, including finance. But if you're in a transformation program, then it absolutely makes sense, doesn't it, to say, what's our strategy for how we grab and exploit and use and get value out of the data. For not only finance, I think is your point, but also aligned to what the rest of the organization is doing. And in many ways, finance and data are kind of, there's a bit of a synergy there about how they interact with an organization. They can both support what the organization is trying to do, but they can also help lead the organization in terms of where it needs to go. And the sort of org structure models are quite similar in terms of like central functions and business partnering. You can do that sort of hub and spoke model, both within finance and within your data, the way you deploy data. So some really commonalities, and lots of, I think, people can learn who are in data focused roles with how finance have evolved and, are tens, if not hundreds of years ahead in terms of its maturity of how it works and operates.
Exactly. I think, and this is part of finance realizing the asset that they're sitting on with the data that they've got, and not just the provision of the standard reports that we've done for hundreds of years. It's more a case of, this is the asset that I'm sitting on, and these are the potentials that I've got, and how can we use that to give a wow factor from a finance perspective.
Brilliant. Cool. Well, it's been fun talking to you, Grant. I think I've had an insightful look into the world of finance and finance transformation. I haven't dabbled in that space for a little while, so it's been fun to reopen it again. And it's just reminded me actually how as I said, how many similarities there are with what you're trying to do with finance transformation and what lots of organizations are trying to do with. And it doesn't really get called this much, but data transformation. And certainly sort of add value and be relevant and make sure you're helping the organization move forward. So this has been huge fun. So thanks very much for coming on the show, Grant.
Well, thank you. No, it was great to be here. It was wonderful.
Great. And thanks everyone for listening. I hope that was an insightful look into the world of finance and transformation, and we'll see you again soon.